Welcome to the Heartland Journal podcast with Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of heartlandjournal.com.
Howdy, y'all. Welcome back to the show. I'm Steve Abramowitz, and this is the Heartland Journal podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and pass it around. We only grow with your help. Thanks for doing it. I'm going to have to put that on a loop. On this show, we are focusing on our nation today with always an interesting person making a positive change in our community, where I interview people who are making an impact and are lovers of truth. Today, we're talking with special guest Jared Sullivan. In his debut book, Valley So Low, One Lawyer's Fight for Justice in the Wake of America's Great Coal Catastrophe, about a 50-year power plant in the small town of Kingston, Tennessee, that burned 14,000 tons of coal a day, gradually creating a mountain of ash and waste 60 feet high and covering 84 acres, contained only by an earthen embankment. In 2008, just before Christmas, that embankment broke, unleashing a lethal wave of coal sludge that covered 300 acres, damaged nearly 30 homes, and precipitating a cleanup effort that would cost more than $1 billion, and the lives of more than 50 cleanup workers who inhaled the toxins it released, allegedly. Jared Sullivan has written for The Atlantic, Garden and Gun, Oxford American, The New Yorker, and Time, Outside, Popular Mechanics, and USA Today, among many other publications. He was an editor for Men's Journal and Field and Stream. He lives outside Nashville, Tennessee with his family. His debut book, Valley So Low, was published in October 2024, not that long ago. The lawsuit that lawyers Scott, Dupree, Davis, and Friedman pursued on the workers' behalf was about their illnesses, no doubt, but was also about whether blue-collar employees could beat the C-suite, if self-described hillbilly lawyers could beat elite corporate defense attorneys, and whether strong evidence could beat fat pocketbooks. With suspense and rich detail, Jared Sullivan's thrilling account lays bare the casual brutality of the American justice system and calls into question whether and how the federal government has failed its people. Available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. Hello, how are you today?
Hi. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Oh, I'm excited myself. Here it is. I read your book. It's interesting. I invited you on about a year ago, I think, to talk about something I must have read in Men's Health. I can't remember now, and then I saw you write up in the Franklin magazine for this book that came out just in October. So timing is everything. On the heels of John Rich making news with TVA, moving into Cheatham County for a methane plant, yada, yada. When you said yes, I ran out and bought it and drank it up in 2 days. So first off, I want to compliment you on this book. It's so well written for a first-time book. I mean, only time actually author. First-time author. This is your only book, right?
Yeah. I've written for magazines extensively, but yeah, this is my first one. So thank you for the kind words. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, literally, subject matter and being able to turn it 2 days, I think it was. So someone named Cassidy gave you a 5 out of 5 stars, a David versus Goliath story. As a native Tennessean who grew up enjoying and respecting the natural beauty of East Tennessee, I'm both angered and saddened to read about the decades of poor environmental stewardship of our beautiful state. Thank you, Jared, for making these families seen and known through your writing. That is so great. What do you say to Cassidy?
Oh, that's a nice compliment. Yeah, I just I grew up here. I grew up in Franklin, outside of Nashville, then moved back here after working elsewhere for a number of years. And yeah, I wrote this book because I care deeply about Tennessee and I want to see Tennessee flourish. And I think we have TVA, but also the state has, made some missteps in terms of the environment, in terms of other things, in terms of power production, in terms of all sorts of things. So this book does come from a place of love. And I like writing about my home state. I like diving into the history of it. So yeah, I appreciate, I've really appreciated all the reader feedback from Tennesseans, but also people from abroad too. I mean, that's almost a bigger compliment when people who have no relation to Tennessee will say, "Oh, this book really meant something to me." I always really appreciate those comments as well. So
yeah, you put Kingston on the map for sure. One lawyer's fight for justice in the wake of America's great coal catastrophe. Did your time with Men's Journal and Field and Stream teach you how to write and research legal documents and interview so well?
Interview, so my first I think of like my first like big boy magazine job, as it were. I worked for some smaller outlets before I moved to New York in 2015 to work for Film Stream. That was my first like kind of big magazine job, and yeah, it was great. I learned. Gosh, well, first I guess I got to just see the country. I fished for salmon in Alaska. I fished for turkeys in the Nebraska sandhills. I went to fish in the deserts of northern New Mexico for trout. It was just a great experience as a young person, just to be able to travel and see the world and open my. I grew up in Tennessee. I didn't really leave that much when I was a kid. Vacations were pretty much just like to Destin, like everyone else in Franklin. That's
Destin,
that's the vacation
for all
spot.
you out of towner folks, that's in Florida. That's a 6 hour drive away to get to the beach.
Yeah. So everyone here. Working for Film and Stream really opened my eyes, but also it opened my eyes to Film and Stream. It wasn't started by Teddy Roosevelt exactly, but it was kind of started by like some of his like cliques, like some of his friends of conservationists and hunters and people who love the outdoors, which I do. I love fly fishing above all, but I kind of dabble in everything else. And these old timers, these turn of the century reformers, they believe deeply in the outdoors, and they also believe that we should find ways to protect it. And because of them, we have things like the ammunition sales fund conservation and wildlife preservation in the United States. It's the Pittman-Robertson Act, and that was just incredible. So just to be able to work for Film and Stream, which is like part of that legacy, was an incredible experience. And yeah, I got to your question. I learned how to call up strangers and be like, hey, tell me about something that's happened to you. Usually it's when you're calling someone for an interview, usually something bad has happened to them. I did a lot of like
they opened up to you for sure. I mean, there's a lot of detail. I hope to get into some of that in our time. And I'm sure TVA and Jacobs Engineering, because everyone always calls it a TVA thing, but it's really a Jacobs Engineering thing. I'm sure they dispute everything, but you use court filings, primary sources, FOIA over 5 years to write it. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So jumping ahead a little bit. Yeah, I was at Men's Journal magazine. I left Film and Stream after a few years. So at Men's Journal in 2019. I was a kid in 2008 when this disaster happened. So basically what happened in the middle of the night, December 22nd, 2008, there's this 6-story tall, 84-acre mound of coal ash. And coal ash is basically what's left over after you burn coal to produce electricity, right? And there's 750 of these. They call them coal ash ponds. They're not really ponds. They're big earthen landfills, right? Well, TVA had one outside of Kingston, which is about a 45-minute drive outside of Knoxville. And in the middle of the night, it collapsed. And it was almost like biblical in scale. I would encourage anyone listening to just quickly Google the photos. I mean, they're pretty
Right
remarkable.
before Christmas Eve, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Just a few days before Christmas. And 1 billion gallons of coal ash sludge kind of broke forth in this gigantic wave and covered 300 acres. And no one died, thank goodness.
Yeah,
But
it was really a miracle that nobody died.
yeah, they
Like a
say
tsunami of soot.
yeah, everyone basically says like if more people were around, because a lot of people were gone for the holidays, if more people were around, if it happened in daylight when more people would have been out and about, it would have been a much different story. But thank goodness no one died. But 300 acres of beautiful Tennessee countryside was covered in this muck. But it was a kind of a crazy. I mean, I guess every time in our country's history is that kind of crazy. But it was a difficult time because, as you'll recall, it was 2008. The housing and stock markets had just collapsed. The American economy was on its knees, and we just elected a new president. Barack Obama was about to get sworn in. So the news got. That's the long way of saying that the news got buried. It was on CNN and some of the big news networks for a couple of days, but it faded pretty fast. And but the story definitely did not stop though once the news networks left, right? So ended up being I believe like 6-year long cleanup effort. It cost TVA $1 billion. And TVA, as your listeners likely know, is a federally owned power company created as part of the New Deal, and has done a lot of good for Tennessee, as I hope I make clear in my book. Especially in the early years, it was a good government in action. It really helped provide electricity for this region and boost incomes and did all sorts of positive things. But it's definitely made some missteps too. And the 2008 Kingston coal ash disaster is, I think, top among its missteps.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that because they have a legacy of cheap energy for an area that didn't have it. So that's fantastic. Thank you, FDR, for signing it in 1933. But with energy comes pollution, and boy, have they had a problem because right up the street, or I should say stream, is Oak Ridge. And obviously, Oak Ridge has a legacy as well. And so this entire area has been sort of used as a dumping ground. But I do want to talk about the legacy of that. But first of all,
Sure, sure,
well,
sure.
last of all, I'm going to say it one more time. Kudos to you for an excellent readable book on a
Oh, thank
topic
you.
of power and greed. That's key here. So tell us, for those that don't know, TVA has had several owners and operators. Well, not owners, it's the government, it's the federal government, but it has had different managers many times. Trump fired one for being overpaid. The one who was sitting there at the time of this disaster was the highest paid federal employee in the government. Um, Roane County, where Kingston is, was the largest in the 1950s, largest power plant in the country.
Hmm.
700,000 homes powered, 14,000 tons per day of coal, or about, if you can envision, 140 train cars
Yeah,
long.
that's right. That's
How
right.
bad was the holding pond that slid into the Emery and Cinch rivers?
Yeah, the Clinch River. It was
Clinch,
yeah,
sorry.
so TVA in 2006, they this big. I mean, it looks like almost like a it's a big mound, a big earthen mound. TVA had planted grass over this coal ash holding pond, so it resembled a hill like you would see at a park or something. Um, but in 2006, so 2 years before this big disaster, there had been like a mini slide, like part of this big mound had collapsed, and there had been a breach, and TVA had fixed it, but they just didn't do anything else to reinforce this big coal ash mound. So yeah, it collapsed. A lot of the ash rushed into the Emery, the Kingston coal fire, the Kingston power plant there in Kingston. It sits at the confluence of two rivers, the Emery and the Clinch, and much of the ash spilled into this river, which is as I kind of point out in the book. This isn't that big of a spoiler, but the river was highly polluted already, thanks to Oak Ridge upstream, where, as your listeners likely know, was the heart of the Manhattan Project. And during that, while they were making the bomb for Second World War, they had, let's say, very lax environmental standards back then. So a lot of uranium got dumped into the river, and it's still there to this day. So this coal ash, jump ahead, whatever, 70 something years, I guess 60 years, whatever it was, to
Started up.
yeah,
Started up like a swizzle stick in a whiskey glass.
yeah, exactly. So this coal ash rushes into this river. All this uranium and other radioactive elements have been sitting on the bottom of this river for a long time. And this is not a secret, by the way. There's several federal agencies have done studies on this. There's extensive records about this. In that part of the river, you can't build a dock without permission from this four agency panel, um, because of the risk of stirring up radioactive contaminants on the bottom of the river. You have to have special permission to build a dock. So this is, like, again, not a secret. And TVA knew when they started
It's
sucking.
literally like the cartoon of The Simpsons where the plant has the three-eyed fish and what I mean, we're talking about this kind of problem for almost 100 years.
Yeah, and so the kind of like the what the government basically said was like, we know this river is contaminated. It's primarily the Clinch River I'm talking about. They kind of thought like the best plan of action was just not to stir up the sediment on the river bottom and just let the radioactive contaminants gradually just sink deeper and deeper and deeper into the sediment. Well, that's not like an ideal solution, but then this disaster happened and it stirred all this radioactive material up. And there's and TVA acknowledged this in documents I found. They
Yeah, I want
said,
people to kind of visualize this, and this is a medium of audio, obviously, but the dike breach was
mhm,
like 1,500 times the volume of water per second that goes over Niagara Falls of coal ash, or about 6 million tons. I read that in your book.
uh,
1 billion gallons. That is 100 times what Exxon Valdez did, and enough to fill four Empire State Buildings. So you said it was a mound that was covered by grass, and I know runners used to run up it and down it because it
mhm.
was exercise and it was part of their natural environment or whatnot. But we're talking a lot of burnt fuel, coal stacked up that ended up, not all of it, but that much in the water system where houses were.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's still according to some me measures, it's the largest industrial disaster in U.S. history. It eclipsed Exxon Valdez, like you said. It's kind of hard to even wrap your mind, like even looking around the photos, it's kind of hard to grasp how much crud TVA released when this coal ash dike collapsed. So, yeah, so it kicked off this huge like I said, multi-year cleanup project where their TVA was sucking, trying to clean up, bulldoze away the coal ash from the land, and they were shipping it to a landfill in Alabama. But they also had to get it out of the river. Well, TVA knew. Well, first of all, I should say coal ash is full. Coal ash, even if it had not mixed with the stuff in the river, I feel like we're getting ahead a little bit on the story. Even if coal ash even had not mixed with this uranium and other radioactive materials, it's still full of like arsenic and beryllium and silica and nasty stuff that you do not want to touch or certainly inhale or anything like that. It's filthy stuff as it is.
Yeah, I want to get
Well,
into that. I read every page of your book, I promise you,
well,
and I
thank you,
want to,
thank
I'm
you.
going to dig into a lot of that. I just try to land the ship from 30,000 feet to the
Yeah,
bottom of
yeah.
it.
But so what happened is this coal ash ran to the river, and workers start sucking up with these dredger boats. It's almost like an underwater vacuum that are kind of on boats and sucking this coal ash to land to get out of the river. And there's certain parts of the river where TVA knew it was too dangerous because of the radioactive contamination. This is in TVA documents that I found. They know like the risk of contamination is too high. They left something like 700,000 tons of coal ash purposefully in the bottom of the river because they thought the risk was too high to suck it up. But there's a number of workers told me, and it's also in court documents, that they had that Geiger counters they had on their boats went off, signaling that they were at risk of radioactive contamination as they were sucking up um, this coal ash. So my book's like a legal thriller. It follows these workers as they're on the job site cleaning up the stuff, but they're also follows this attorney Jim Scott, because these workers, this is not a huge spoiler by any means, they get sick from being around this stuff, and they turn to this personal injury attorney in Knoxville by the name of Jim Scott. He's kind of sort of the only person who believes them. This is in 2013. And then he spends the next 10 years of his life and puts himself through all sorts of hell to try to seek justice for these blue, those hardworking blue collar Tennesseans. There's 900, I should say, 900 men and women from mostly from Tennessee, but also from as far away as Florida and New York, came down to Tennessee after the coal ash dike collapsed in 2008, because as we already talked about, like the economy was crumbling, right? So they needed work. So in a sense, for these blue collar workers, and I focus on a couple of them in the book, the disaster was a godsend in some respects because they needed the work, and this was like a ton of work. They could get overtime. They could make, some of them made the best money of their whole careers at this, because there's at the cleanup, because there was just so much to do and so many hours available. So what the trouble was, when they're on the job site cleaning up this coal ash stuff, TVA, within the day of this disaster, they get their PR people on in front of news cameras, and basically their PR team say this coal ash stuff, yes, there's some like potentially harmful constituents in it, but don't worry about it. It poses no substantial threat to public health. TVA people say this over and over again. They tell this to the workers. And
So before we get too deep into the
sure,
cleanup,
sure, sure, sure.
I wanted to just kind of put a overview of TVA and how they run 600
Yeah.
plants just like this. EPA has actually no regulations for waste, and Oak Ridge is right there. We talked about, and it's been polluting since World War II, but they were shipping it all to poor Arkansas. Why
Uh,
Arkansas?
um, uh, Alabama, the
My
coal ash.
bad, my
Yeah,
bad.
yeah, no, it's fine. That's fine. Uh, that's a good question. I mean, that's like a hotly contested. That's a kind of hotly contested point. Why, the EPA and TVA would say, well, there's what's called like a lined landfill there. It has a bed of Selma chalk, which is just really hard material that would prevent coal ash from leaching into the ground and into groundwater, because there's, like I said, there's 750 of these coal ash ponds throughout the country, and most of them are just bare holes in the ground. I didn't know this. I started reporting my
They
book.
didn't even have liners.
No, because I started doing this in like the 40s and 50s, which there wasn't tight really any meaningful environmental regulations back then. So each year, it's still to this day, these coal ash ponds across the country, they contaminate hundreds, thousands of miles of American rivers each year. And that's true here in Tennessee. Like my water has elevated levels of certain constituents because of TVA's plants up near Nashville. Because of I'm thinking mostly of the Gallatin plant specifically, which TVA is in the process of exhuming that coal ash and moving it somewhere else because it's leached so many toxins into our water supply. And that's a Tennessee story, but it's also a national story. So back to the landfill. TVA and EPA, they decided to ship the coal ash from Kingston down to this landfill in Perry County, Alabama, which is one of the poorest counties in all of America. And so it's like a poor, impoverished, mostly Black community there. And the community has tried to file lawsuits alleging civil rights abuses, but their lawsuits have not, unfortunately for them, have not gone very far. So
lawsuits are very expensive, as we're about to find out, and from your book, really.
Yeah, it's also like hard to prove. It's also just like like the burden of proof of these cases is really high. So
right, nobody's done enough to write in a memo like send it to the poor Black neighborhoods. They don't care. That would be stupid.
Yeah. Like they have no political power, so send it to the people with no political power. Yeah, no one.
Exactly.
No
like
one
put it on an elementary school. They don't vote. So they hired, TVA did, a company called Jacobs to do the cleanup, and a guy named Bach, B-O-C-K, to supervise. Tell us about Bach and the company Jacobs and how they totally blew it and disregarded the property values and human value, really, of the whole area.
Yeah. So, well, first, I mean, I want to talk about, like, I think it's important to put this whole disaster into context a little bit. I'm happy to talk about Bach and them, but TVA. It was my book is very, very critical of TVA because I think this whole disaster was a huge misstep. But I am actually TVA for all its faults. Like I want it to do good things, and it has really benefited the people of Tennessee over the years. And I like to think with the right reforms, and it needs serious reforms to be sure. I think it could benefit the people of Tennessee again. It was like when in 1933, when FDR took office, the average Tennessean made something like 45% of the national median household income or something like that. It works out to about $6,000 a year adjusted for inflation today. So people in 1933 were living off $6,000 a year in today's money. People here had nothing. Most homes did not have toilets. Only 3% of farms had electricity. There's actually, I read in a book in my research that this area, the whole Tennessee Valley, which the Tennessee Valley, it's Tennessee, but also parts of six neighboring states. It's 42, I think it's like 42,000 square miles or something. It's a huge part of our country. It's the Southeast essentially. Things were so bleak here in that time that there was actually some fear of this area was ripe for some kind of like populist revolution, because the Bolshevik Revolution had not been that many years earlier, right? So that was on the minds of policymakers.
If I could just add to what you're saying real quick, TVA was awesome accomplishment by government, proving it can do it. FDR based it on the New York Power Authority and went from 3% of our power in the country to 70% in just 10 years, electrifying regions, farms, and 40,000 jobs, which during the jobs market, that is important. And then, of course, with eminent domain, 1950s, tritium is in every warhead in the U.S. arsenal, and Oak Ridge Nuclear, and in 1959 became self-funding with bonds. And by 1967, Nashville, Chattanooga, and Knoxville ranked worst air quality, with Kingston worse even than those three.
Yeah, that was a fast way to get through some of the history. Yeah, so TVA, it helped us win the war. It powered Oak Ridge. It still makes stuff called tritium. It's like the detonator on every nuclear warhead. It doesn't deliver the full blast, but it's like the initial blast that makes all the other.
It's like the bullet that hits the trigger that blows up the Fat Man over Japan.
Yeah, so TVA makes tritium still to this day. And so incomes rose dramatically. So I really think this is like, there's a bit like, I love talking to business groups about this book because um, TVA spurred a lot of industry in this region. I feel like we as Tennesseans should be rooting for TVA to get its power cost down lower, so we continue to attract businesses here and continue to see this region flourish. Our economy, I mean, it has improved over the past decade or so, but we still lag. Like our GDP per capita, our household income still lags much of the rest of the country, despite how much the Nashville area is booming. So there's still TVA could still play a huge role in helping lift and elevate this region, and that's my great hope.
Yeah,
It's my
no,
great hope.
100%. It is vital. It is the lifeblood, let's just say, of energy in this area, and we are a booming economy. So if we want the Celtic tiger or the Southern tiger to keep going, we need it. We just need them to be clean and have good contractors. And so tell us about Bach,
Yeah, yeah.
the guy that said eat a pound a day is safe. Wasn't it him?
Yeah, so yeah, jumping back to the cleanup, TVA, this is standard now, I've realized, but TVA hired this contractor, Jacobs Engineering. It's renamed itself Jacobs Solution within the last few years. It was one of the top, one of the largest government contractors at the time. They do work for NASA. They do work for foreign governments, doing all sorts of engineering, environmental cleanup projects. So TVA hired Jacobs to kind of oversee like the day-to-day site cleanup or site safety, rather, at the job site. And site safety it's a big deal at any job site. But there's this gentleman, Tom Bach, who I should say like he's in court documents, but also to me has denied any wrongdoing, and so has Jacobs. I should make that clear.
Mhm.
I think the evidence is pretty compelling, though, that they did make some mistakes. So basically, as these workers are on the job, Tom Bach and other Jacobs employees kind of repeat what TVA has said, is that there's no legitimate health risk on the job site. Basically, don't worry about coal ash. TVA and Jacobs, or TVA, they have all these water trucks drive around the job site spraying this coal, because the coal ash, when it first collapsed, was really mucky and wet, soupy for the first few years. But then after a few summers under the Tennessee sun, it starts to dry and it starts to fly in the air.
Little
So
dust devils and wind.
yeah, I mean, I have pictures of it. It's like whiteouts in some instances when the wind got really blowing. But TVA, well, Jacob, they told the workers over and over again that this stuff poses no substantial health risks, and that and Tom Bach, this one Jacobs employee in particular, said that you could eat a pound of fly ash a day and be fine. And he later in court, in depositions and in trial, try to couch that saying, well, it wasn't exactly what I meant. I meant something different. You misunderstood me, yada, yada,
I
yada.
was
But the work,
joking, yeah.
yeah,
But he's also the one who denied the ventilators and the masks and said
yeah, so
that we'd fire you if you show up for the TV cameras with it on.
so the workers, they start getting, start feeling ill within the first year or so on the job, and they start requesting dust masks, which are standard on most job sites. And what they hear from their supervisors is that no, there's no need for it here. That you risk overheating in the Tennessee summer if you wear a dust mask. That is actually the thing to be concerned about. It's how hot it is. It's not about what you're breathing in. It's fine. And TVA and Jacobs, they had all these, or let me say this, on the job site, they had all these air monitors set up around, and the workers also wore these portable devices, air monitoring devices, on their clothes at times, that sampled the air for dust and for hazards, and they send those to a lab, and they get these samples tested. And so what the workers were told over and over again is that all the sampling data, it all suggests that you're not being exposed to harmful material. And so they were like, okay, well, then their health just gets worse and worse and worse, and hundreds of them end up getting sick with all sorts of respiratory.
Not just the workers on the job, but when they would go home at night, their wives and kids started developing symptoms because of how much gunk they were bringing into their house. It couldn't get it off.
Yeah, that's what they allege, and I think credibly allege, was that the workers would come home covered in the stuff. And yeah, they're some of them described their washing machines getting all gunked up and fouled with it. and some of their kids have health problems. You know, that those allegations are incredibly hard to prove. That's what this whole case is about. So they go to Jim Scott. He pursues a lawsuit against Jacobs Engineering, and so this whole case was like proving, you know, not just that you worked in coal ash, but proving that you inhaled or around enough of it to cause the litany of health problems that you're alleging, you know. And I realized
Without
these.
proper protection provided by your employer, which would be in their safety manual. So obviously they were breaking those rules. So let's dig into those guys. So these lawyers, which is what your book is mostly about, they obviously went through hell themselves. Very expensive, no money to do these cases, and no one else would do it. Even had their office burnt down with all the files that they collected in them. Tell us, and that's we can't prove that that was maliciously done, but interestingly enough, at the right time. Tell us what kind of men these guys were. Let's start with Scott and Dupree. They did sacrifice everything for very long odds. You don't really fight the man.
Yeah, so Jim's I wanted to tell, you know, this book was just about TVA or coal ash. I think it might be like a snooze kind of, right? I wanted to people like law, you know, like legal thrillers. So I was like, okay, to keep people turning the page, I'm gonna tell like the legal side of this because it was very compelling. So I found this lawyer, Jim Scott. He was the first. He's about like 5 foot. He's a short lawyer, like 5'10" or something. He has a mess of curly black hair. He grew up in Oak Ridge. His dad's a judge there, and he's a character. He's just a kind of a knucklehead. He's like a good old boy that any Tennessean would recognize. But he's a lot of heart. But he wasn't like a big. He'd worked some big cases, but he was not like a big high powered attorney who had this, you know, this huge war chest of funds to you know, to go to battle with. No, just the opposite. He was financing the case himself. All these personal injury attorneys basically work on contingency, meaning you only get paid if you win. But Jim was convinced that these workers had a strong case and that TVA and Jacobs had done them wrong. And he drugged the case on for 10 years. And
By the way, Jim Scott. I said his last name Scott, but it's Jim Scott, Jimmy.
Jim Scott. Yeah, Jim Scott. Yeah, and he's still in practice today.
And his dad's a judge, as you said, and he's literally said can't beat that money. Talking about TVA, a federal agency. Why do you think the judge, said that when there was so much damage, the law wouldn't still win over TVA when the
Well,
evidence was clear?
yeah, well, it's really hard to sue not just TVA but any federal agency. It's just incredibly difficult because they do have staff attorneys who are usually very well trained, and they can work on these cases for hours and hours and hours without too much concern about, like, you know, expense or whatnot. So yeah, so Jim, and also like TVA and many federal agencies, they enjoy what's called sovereign immunity, where it basically is like it's really hard to sue the government unless you can prove um, like basically like gross negligence. I mean, it's really hard to sue the government for doing the basic functions of government, and that's what TVA was alleging in this case, that they were executing the basic functions of government. So that's why Jim's suit was actually against Jacobs Engineering, the contractor, not about TVA. But I think I provide ample evidence in the book that TVA was also made some gross missteps.
And it really did highlight the crux or the problem because of the quasi-government agency that is also providing a public service and utilities, because that means any accidents, any hazards, anyone dies on the job, you can't do anything about it. It's almost like the vaccine liability waiver, or the chemical companies now want that. We'll get into that in a second. But okay, so Scott ended up losing his wife over this whole thing. Just a terrible story. He loses his health, really.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil anything, but he's a real man, and it's out there. You can read the news.
Mhm.
And then Dupree, also a savvy lawyer who kind of knew, like, wow, these are long odds. And it took a team. So we got Jeff Friedman and Gary David, the other two lawyers. They all live there in that town or nearby, so they knew
Yeah.
everything we've discussed thus far. Tell us about those gentlemen.
Yeah. So Jim basically gets in over his head, and he's like, after a couple of years, he's like, he gets in over his head. He's like, I need help. I can't do this alone. So he brings in other lawyers he has known throughout the course of his career. And they're just like a bunch of good old boys, you know, they're all like Tennessee born and raised. John Dupree grew up in Knoxville. There's another lawyer, Keith Stewart. He grew up in Hawkins County. It was kind of he was kind of Keith in particular is a knucklehead. He got arrested for selling coke when he was in college and spent time in prison for it, but got out and turned his life around
Read
and got
those
his
law
law.
books in jail. Yeah, gave him
Yeah,
time.
read his law books in jail and turned his life around. It's a really incredible story. But he's still like kind of he's I don't think he's actually rough around the edges, but he just like still has quite the vocabulary, let's say, that he picked up in prison. Um, he's a big personality. Then there's some other Jeff Friedman is a kind of like the a and he was an ace environmental or is an ace environmental attorney in Birmingham, and he was kind of like the pro they brought in towards once the trial came, and another attorney by Gary Davis. And yeah, there's a bunch of like good old boys, and they met these workers and they understood these workers, and they wanted to do right by them because no one else was on these workers' side. And it's a big gamble. All of them put up their own personal funds to drag this case forward. And this, I mean, it's like the time is one thing, right? Like time is money. So
And
they
like and
devoted.
like you said earlier, this was a big job for them. So it's not as if they had all this excess money laying around to create a big pool to be able to do discovery and do all the work. So they
Yeah,
were
and you
really
there's a
David versus Goliath, as you said.
yeah, it was. And so they yeah, their office caught on fire right before trial. They have a few other big setbacks that are I mean Jim, yeah, I mean it like kind of wrecked Jim's life a little bit. But the case reached trial in Knoxville in 2018, and that's to Jim's credit. I'm not sure how much you want to give away, but it was
Well, we can talk about this. I mean, one of them said bankruptcy or a private jet. I mean, those were the odds of this trial is like a huge win or we're all done. And really that shows they were risking it all for these harmed workers, not for themselves to get rich because you take that chance. But you know,
well, yeah, they could have they let's be I mean they ended up making like good paydays. They did not become fabulously rich, these
yeah,
attorneys,
no
but
guarantee in the beginning though, and it took 18 years.
Yeah, I think it took well, yeah. So it took a decade from the time they filed the lawsuit until there was until the cases. I don't want to say what happened until there's a resolve. Let me say that until the
Yeah.
cases were kind of finished. It took a decade, but yeah, but the cases got involved. Started a number of years after the disaster, even. So yeah, it was almost a 20-year ordeal after the whole thing was said and done.
You know, so John Travolta in a civil action, Matthew
Hmm.
McConaughey in the Lincoln Lawyer, Richard Gere, Primal Fear. This case was called Aaron Brockovich Looks Like Sesame Street. If it was made into a movie, who would play you?
Play me? No, I don't think anyone would play me. I'm not a character in the book. Thankfully, I it felt um I it felt like it wasn't my story. Like I wanted to tell the story. But I think who I think would play a great Jim Scott, the lawyer, was Brad Pitt, because if you saw The Informant, where he's kind of like this bumbling government mole, or not, what is he? Informant.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's a
yeah, he's an
government
informant.
informant.
He's a mole. Yeah,
Yeah.
a narc.
And he's like good-hearted but kind of bumbling. And I'm not saying Jim is like totally bumbling, but there's like a certain Jim is he's he's a bit of a character. So I think Matt Damon could. I'll just say this: Matt Damon could capture Jim's essence, I think, very, very well. So
Interesting. So seriously, that was kidding there, but was it considered worse than Aaron Brockovich? They got a $333 million payout, and Exxon Valdez, which was smaller tonnage spill. Was this a multi-billion dollar case that they ever thought they'd win? Because both companies are billion dollar franchises, Jacobs and TVA, which the harder one was TVA, obviously.
I mean, yeah, I quote Jim in the book saying this case makes Aaron Brockovich look like Sesame Street. That's his opinion. I think that's valid. There was this size of the catastrophe was, like I said, was huge. It's the largest industrial uh, disaster in U.S. history by some measures. I think something like 300 workers end up coming forward and being on the case. So it's just a large number of plaintiffs too.
How many have
50,
died so far?
it's more than 50 now. Have died after having worked at the site. So, yeah, it's a huge case. It's a huge case. It's kind of hard to quantify, like what's like the
Yeah.
severity and stuff like that. But
Well, no, I
it's a
want people to
huge
read the
case.
book to get all the dirty details. I'm just trying
Yeah,
to get
yeah.
in a short period of time.
I think it's a hugely important case. And
So Jamie Satterfield,
mhm,
the Aaron Brockovich of the story, basically kept this issue alive in the press. Nobody else really did. I didn't see
mhm.
very much Tennessean. I didn't see very much CNN, whatever. Tell us about her.
Yeah, Jamie Satterfield's she's an amazing reporter. I was a senior in high school when the disaster happened. I remember watching footage of it and thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible." Uh, but what but I wouldn't have known about the lawsuits if not for her though. I was in 2018, I guess 18 or 19. I was an editor for Men's Journal in New York, and I saw her kind of dispatch as she was writing from the courtroom about this case, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I remember when this disaster happened, but I didn't know there was this legal drama unfolding between the workers." So she was dogged. She after the lawyers, she did eventually listen to the workers. She was one of the first people besides the lawyers to listen to them, and she wrote some very and she did a hell of a lot of research and reporting, and found many of the stuff I found, about how coal ash was full of arsenic and other gross stuff. She published this video, which the workers gave to Jim Scott first, but she published in the Knoxville News Sentinel on their website. And it's one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in the whole case, where this worker, he's out in a dusty field and he has an iPhone on like a little lanyard around his neck. And he's smart enough. He presses the record button on, he's recording video, and he goes up to a Jacobs staffer, a site safety staffer, and ask, can I wear a dust mask on the site? Will I get fired if I wear a dust mask? And at first, the Jacobs staffer kind of hees and haws and says, no, it's the pollen, it's the whatever, don't worry about it. Then the worker just says, like, come on, would I get fired if I wore a dust mask? And the Jacobs staffer shoots back and says, don't hang yourself with your own cock.
Yeah.
And that's on camera. I mean, that's pardon the crude language, but Jamie Satter got a hold of that video and she published it, and that's much to her credit. I think when a lot of people saw that in Knoxville, they realized, oh my gosh, these workers are not kidding about being intimidated about not wearing dust masks on the job site. I mean,
Yeah.
they have that in color and in sound.
And the CEO at the time, Kilgore, he called it a magical layer of slime defense, or what would be an act of God, which would waive all of their liabilities. And he was the highest paid federal employee in
Yeah, and the TVA's
2006-ish.
yeah, TVA's. I mean, I don't want to, that's how high the TVA's chief executive is and has long been the highest paid federal employee. Their argument is like, well, that is standard compensation for a C-suite person in the energy industry.
Well, the Duke Energy one does make a lot more than the one now, but that is a big deal when you're supposed to be working for the government.
Yeah, so they say to get the best and brightest. Again, I'm not defending how much they pay TVA
Yeah.
CEO. I'm just saying their argument has been, well, we want the best and the brightest executive in the industry.
And I don't even care about the money. I'm just more concerned, like, where did he come up with this magical layer of slime defense to try to say, like, no, it wasn't an industrial accident. It was an act of God.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was TVA's defense in the one of the early trials about property damage. They said it wasn't our fault that this coal ash dike collapsed. There was this magical layer of slimes that collapsed, and there's no way we could have known about it. It was an act of God. There's nothing we could have done to prevent this. Well, the judge did not buy that. He found that TVA, a
Especially
federal
since they
judge.
had such a history, because of all the whistleblowers in the country in 1989, 90% were from his TVA, and they have a poor safety record. So
Yeah, in the
that would have
nuclear,
been laughed out of most courts.
in the nuclear, those say yes. At one point, TVA's nuclear plants had one were responsible for a very very high percentage of whistleblower complaints. That's true. That's absolutely true. So
Yeah. So let's talk about what fly ash is. Arsenic, aluminum oxide, iron oxide, silica, four toxic components right there. They were called a Long Island iced tea of poison by one of your guys. He called it that. Later found selenium, cadmium, boron, thallium. Those are
mhm.
radioactive. TVA website says 23 heavy metals and toxins, their own website. How can they say that and have a safety and healthy plan?
Yeah, I mean that's the question. Like how TVA, well, TVA, they say that, well, yes, we knew that there were potentially toxic material in this fly ash. Fly ash is basically the airborne version of coal ash. They said, yeah, we knew that there was toxins, but the workers were not exposed to it at dangerous levels. That was Jacobs' argument the whole time. That's what TVA basically said as much.
Which is why
And
they sprayed down the dust and messed with the sensors so that it looked like it was tolerable.
yeah, yeah.
Allegedly.
But so if you don't mind, I do want to talk about like what TVA, because TVA has been in the, John Rich, targeted. Can we talk about that? Do you mind?
Yeah, no, it's your show. Go for it.
I don't. TVA in the process after the Kingston coal ash disaster, TVA, it was a kind of a wake up call. Like, okay, we have to get off of coal because it's expensive, it's pollutant, all this other stuff.
Which also happens to be the largest coal producer in the country and world.
It used to be the big, TVA at one point in the 50s was the country's largest coal consumer. So the trouble is that TVA in the 60s, they tried to build 7 jumbo nuclear power plants. And because of some missteps and almost near disasters, they only end up building 3 of them.
Oh yeah, that's another point that's important. Oak Ridge is the largest building in the whole country, too, at one point, maybe still is. So literally, TVA works with very big stuff.
Very big stuff. And that's Oak Ridge was, they decided to build it in Tennessee because of the abundant power TVA could provide.
And land.
But yeah, so TVA after this disaster, so in the 70s they had some near disasters of some of their plants. They only ended up building 3 of the 7 they had planned, which now it's like, to me, that's like the great tragedy. One of the great tragedy of TVA is that they did not build all 7 of those nuclear power plants. Because jump ahead to today, and our power in Tennessee is not any cheaper, not significantly cheaper than anywhere else in the rest of the country, which is a real shame because TVA's, they always, in the early days, they talked about TVA being a yardstick for public power. They said, we're going to get our rates so low that it's going to drive down the cost in other,
right. Our
other
supply
systems.
will be so large that the demand will be dwarfed and it'll be cheap.
Yeah, and other utilities will feel like they have to compete with us
and get off coal by doing it if they would have went nuclear.
Yeah, so because of some missteps, they got stuck on coal. They only built 3 of their 7 plants, and it wasn't really until 2008 that they was like, okay, now we have to get off coal for real. They had 11 at one point. They had 11 of the world's largest coal-fired power plants. They are slowly transitioning them to gas. Natural gas. Yeah, natural gas, which has about half the emissions rate as coal. So it is an improvement, but it's still emits carbon to the atmosphere. And as John Rich pointed out, and I have some issues with this video, but as he did point out, they had to build pipelines to supply these plants with gas, and those pipelines cross over private property, and TVA has the power of eminent domain to basically say, well, they can do that within the law.
And originally they wanted to just use it to power Nashville, which has unsatiable demand, and not even give the energy to the people of Cheatham County. But then they finally bent over and said, okay, you can have some of the power too. So it'll help.
Yeah, I'm fuzzy on the details about that. I'm fuzzy on the details of that. But
it might be your next book.
But here's the problem. And I don't agree with Marsha Blackburn on almost anything, or Bill Haggerty, but they did come out and encourage TVA to look more into nuclear, and they are right about that.
And Tim Burchett from Knoxville, he just came out with the TVA Transparency Act, so they're really under the gun right now trying to improve. Yeah,
Tim introduces that like every year, but Congress never takes it up. It's good that he does that, but he should make bigger noise about TVA. So here's the problem with TVA. If people don't want gas pipelines going through their property, this is what needs to happen. TVA in the 70s, in the 50s, Eisenhower, because of ideological reasons, even though TVA had meaningfully improved the lives of Tennesseans and boosted our incomes, but for ideological reasons, he accused TVA of being an example of, quote, creeping socialism. He did not like TVA. Never mind that he built the interstates and did something very, very similar in employing blue-collar workers across the country and building interstates. But never mind that. He did not like TVA for ideological reasons. So him and his conservative colleagues in Congress withheld funds from TVA, appropriation funds. And so in 1959, TVA was like, well, because after World War II, Oak Ridge was still building bombs for the Cold War. So TVA had to meet demand. They had to keep building plants. So Congress in 1959, they let TVA self-finance the operation through bond sales. Okay. The problem is that a few years later, they capped how much debt, how much bonds TVA could issue at $30 billion. And that was set in the 70s, and that has not risen with inflation.
Yeah, they're
Okay.
almost there now. They had $20 billion of
So
debt
now
today.
they are, after building all these projects, they are $20 billion in debt. So they have $10 billion of wiggle room to finance new projects. And it costs more than $10 billion to build a new nuclear plant. So they're in a position now where gas is like the only thing they can really afford to build. So if Marsha Blackburn and Bill Hagerty want to do something that benefits the state, all they should do is change the formula for that $30 billion debt limit to make it where it's not nominal, where it's indexed towards inflation, right? So I forget exactly how much it would be, $30 billion today, adjusted for inflation from 1970 something. It would be like $100 something billion they could take on in debt, that would be significant breathing room to build more stuff that we in Tennessee, that Tennesseans would really, really benefit from, because we need cheap, abundant power in this state. To keep growing our economy. So
Yeah, you're right. Solar wind and solar wind and hydro is not enough.
I'm not opposed to those. I mean,
There's not enough wind, eh?
I'm not opposed to those. I'm not opposed to that by any means. But I think we need to be realistic about the demand. And nuclear, TVA after their nuclear program has not been perfect, but they've done overall a decent job. People would debate me with that, but
yeah. The lights do come on, so we'll give it that. I live in where you just moved from. Used to be a forest, and now we have actually beautiful homes that the power comes on and the light. We can run to internet and we can have the Zoom call. So it is certainly been a force for progress, and I'm not going to knock it one iota, but it is a polluter, and that is true. And so Jacobs's replacement of their CEO Wilkinson called it hot stuff, but he also said less radioactive than table salt. And
sorry, we talk about the fly ash.
Yeah, I got to switch gears a little bit to back to the problem here, because fly ash has radium in it. Mm-hmm. And even the Alabama workers we talked about that unload it, they wear hazmat suits, you said in your book. So mm-hmm. Two multi-billion-dollar companies not considering workers' safety, no masks, no doctor's notes, layoffs if they bought their own gear. Tell us about Ansel and Jamie Clark and how he told Scott, "You've got the ball now, run with it," before he died.
There's a lot to go over there. Yeah. Yeah. And so I focused on this one couple, Ansel and Jamie Clark. They're from Knoxville. There's good, they grew up in Knoxville. Neither of them went to college, but they had, over the years, built nice little lives for themselves. They have a cute little house in the West Knoxville suburbs. Ansel showed up the day the spill happened to start cleaning up, and he got sick really, really, really fast. And I got to know him before his death, and it was losing him was really, really hard. But Janie his wife is a saint. She was very, very open with me, and wanted the details of what happened to him to be public, because she thought the story was so important. And what I've realized is we just don't care about blue collar workers in the United States, but especially not in Tennessee. We had these workers. In the early 2000s, the Tennessee legislature, General Assembly, passed all these laws under the guise of tort reform that made it harder for blue collar workers to sue their employers over negligence, like this case. And Bill Lee was actually a huge proponent of these quote unquote tort reform laws that made it harder for workers to sue. That's how we kind of got started in politics. So there's this law, jump ahead, one of the laws that they passed under the guise of tort reform. And I should say, like, Bill Frist is a big player in this too. He drummed up all this fear that, like, oh, personal injury attorneys, they're the devil. They're going to drive us all out of business. Well, Bill Frist has vested interest in demeaning personal injury attorneys, because his family owns a large healthcare company, hospital chain. And so, anyways, these workers, they get sick, and their case, Jacobs appeals it to the Tennessee Supreme Court, because there's this law called the Silica Claims what's it called? The Silica Claims Something Act that was passed as part of tort reform that basically makes it very, very hard to sue an employer if you're exposed to silica. Silica it's a common substance on most job sites. So the law was clearly designed to prevent construction workers and the like from suing their employers for not providing them with dust masks and respirators. Well, what's that have to do with the coal ash? Well, silica is the most abundant substance on Earth. It's in every rock, basically. And so it's also a large part of coal ash. So Jacobs Engineering, they say that this law should be thrown out thanks to this Tennessee statute about silica.
Because the presence of silica would neuter any harmful agents like uranium and
They
radioactive
said this
material.
stuff is mostly silica. This stuff is mostly silica.
Even though it takes a very small amount of the toxic stuff to make you sick, the majority being silica,
Yeah,
like everything else on Earth besides methane, is okay, makes it okay.
that's exactly
Novel case, very interesting.
That's exactly the logic. It's such a small stat. And Jacobs, I don't think they discovered it till like 2018 when they tried to appeal it, because I think it's so obscure that no one had ever acted on it. I don't know that for a fact, but it's a very obscure Tennessee law. Well, it goes to Tennessee Supreme Court, and I was there in court that day.
It's like saying
And
if you can't sue a car driver for hitting you because, rubber is immune from liability or something like
or
that.
if, no, it's a judge at the Tennessee Supreme Court said this. If there's glass is mostly silica too. If there's glass in your cornflakes and you eat and somehow
Oh, dear God.
and you eat the glass in your cornflakes, is that covered under this Tennessee statute? And Jacob's lawyer had to argue. Well, he kind of heat and holler, but basically, like, yeah, I guess it's a ridiculous law, and it should not be on the books. Like whoever lawmakers listen to this, you'd be doing a benefit to blue collar workers if if we scrap this law. It's a bad law.
So
And it's
besides
and
that,
so that put before the Tennessee Supreme Court could rule on that decision, it basically the workers had to rush to basically resolve the case, because before they didn't want the case to get thrown out
they had to settle before it was thrown out,
and not all of them
on
were,
a technicality, so to speak.
yeah. And
Not a lawyer, but yeah.
there's a few other factors that inspired them to settle, but that was a big one. And that I didn't go too much in detail about that because I didn't want to get the book too obsessed or too focused on Tennessee law and whatnot. But
well, that is an interesting loophole that they had to defend against, so to speak.
It's not a loophole. It was designed to do what it did. That law was designed to protect companies like Jacobs Engineering from having to protect the workers. And I cover finance for my day job. I'm a big believer in business, but we should be rooting for like good businesses here. Like we can have great, upstanding, and we do have some of them, upstanding companies in this state. We should not be catering our laws, in my view, to companies, helping protect companies that do not do the responsible, upright thing.
Yeah.
We are better than that as Tennesseans.
And just to put a cap on that, Kilgore was replaced by Bill Johnson in 2012. He came from Progress Energy in North Carolina with their own coal problems. So it's not as if they were trying to improve the situation or make coal more valuable. But here's an interesting thing I saw. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of rushing for time.
You're fine.
So fly ash is actually worth money. It's not like a waste product that you're just like, oh, let's let it go. So after Exxon Valdez, 11 million gallons in Alaska, cost them $5 billion. I'll talk about how it didn't actually cost them $5 billion, but that's what the settlement was.
Mm-hmm.
GM, 100 plus deaths. They had to recall 2.7 million cars, very costly. Purdue Pharma, OxyContin, ruined a lot of lives, addicting a lot of people to painkillers. Core Civic, private prisons, civil rights issues, all represented by a man named Jimmy Sanders.
Yeah,
Big liberal attorney guy. Was he trying to preserve the $1 billion fly ash market TVA gets by selling that stuff?
Yeah, so so Jimmy Sanders, he's a lawyer here in Nashville for this firm called Neal and Harwell. He's involved in like you said, the Exxon Valdez lawsuits. By all accounts,
by the way, all those I listed, he was involved in.
Yeah. So he did not talk to me for this book. I spoke to people he's worked with over the years, and he's by all accounts a very, very talented attorney. And when you have a disaster, he's one of these people you call because I think he's so likable in a courtroom that his goal is basically to lose less in these cases. These big companies.
He got the $5 billion down to something like $30,000 per person. It was like Nothing.
Was it five? I forget the exact number. Was it 5 billion? I don't recall that specific with the Exxon Valdez settlements. Where I know it's in my book, but it's
It
been a while
started
since I
there,
looked
but
at
he
it.
got it down because he's so good at being the fixer. Yeah.
I forget. Yeah, I forget the exact numbers, but yeah, his he's very skilled at getting juries to to lose less. So these big companies, when they get involved in these environmental suits, they could know they have to pay like some kind of settlement in most cases, but his job is just like to get it down less, and he's very, very effective at that. I wish he would have spoken to me. He seems like a very charismatic figure, but unfortunately he declined. So
Yeah. But you did talk to William Isley, Bill, and Lena. He died at age 45, cardiovascular disease and pulmonary emphysema, known diseases caused by fly ash. Tell us about Billy.
yeah, he's one of the workers that started at the cleanup very, very early, and also unfortunately, I think he was like, gosh, in his 40s or something when he died.
45, the book said.
Yeah. It's been a while since I looked at the book. Yeah, and his case was complicated because he was also probably using illegal drugs, but he was one of the early workers who died, and his death really gripped the other workers, and ended up being kind of like it was like the first of a cresting wave. He was like the first person to die. Then it became, the deaths kind of became a lot more frequent after his death. So yeah, I just think like we can do better this as Tennesseans. Tennessee has so much opportunity and so much potential, and stuff like this case. Tennessee, like, protecting the environment is like in our interest as like citizens, but also like there's business case to be made for caring for our environment. Like, Tennessee loses more college graduates than it obtains.
Mm.
Tennessee gets very little like VC funding. And why like we like lose our best and brightest. And I really think it's because a lot of people see stuff like this and they're like, oh gosh, Tennessee, it's so, it's this backward thing happening. It's like a repellent, right? It can be repellent to some people.
Yeah, you're not going to build a house or a resort vacation home on that river if it's polluted. So, right? I mean,
Yeah, and it just like gives us like a less than great. I say I love Tennessee, but stuff like this, it doesn't reflect well on us. It really doesn't. And I just think we can, as Tennesseans, we can do better. Like, we can have, like, TVA can help drive the economy, and it can do it in a way that doesn't also like pollute a ton and hurt innocent, hurt hardworking, innocent, Tennesseans, right? And
absolutely.
we're capable, but we should be capable of doing both things. So, back to the John Rich thing, like he made a big deal about eminent domain, which TVA can do that. They can build, they can come on your property to build a pipeline and to survey, and and my book's critical of TVA, and he was critical of TVA, and TVA deserves criticism. And I appreciate him for actually caring about TVA, because I think for too long, people have just not thought about it.
Yeah.
Everyday people. So I take some issues with some stuff he said, but like, at the end of the day, like, we are the government. Like, that's the beauty of democracy. We the people are the government, and we can demand better of TVA. And if we don't like something about it, we can nudge our lawmakers to do something about it, and we can leverage TVA to benefit this state as it had in the FDR era. So
When
that's
something goes wrong, it's sort of the state points at the agency points at the state. I mean, you never get so hard. It's so much of a Leviathan. It's very hard to get justice when coming out. So tell us about Judge Varlin. Was he fair? And he was nice enough to grant an extension for medical experts to do the reports, because obviously those take a long time and the trial was rushing along, but only because mysteriously the lawyer's office was burned down was the reason why he granted it, not because of the delays that it would take. What's up with that made for TV gangster behavior?
Judge Vaughn is a federal judge in Knoxville, and I know there's been a lot of hate towards federal judges. In my view, it's largely unwarranted. But I would encourage Judge Varlin as a careful, conservative judge in Knoxville. I think him and I probably had, don't. I'm not. How do I say this?
Don't see eye to eye on a lot of
Yeah, maybe.
issues.
I don't know. I don't want to say I don't know. I've never met him. I mean, I don't want to say that because I'm like, then again, maybe we would. I have no idea. But I have respect for his jurisprudence. I think anyone who read his 80-page, carefully thought out orders and memorandums would also feel the same. I think he did a commendable job with this case. I walked away with a lot of respect for the federal courts after this case. It's a slog though. This case was a slog. There's no way around it. I think
Yeah.
Judge
Plus,
Barlin
the other
tried.
side had the ability to delay with their money at no expense, and the other guys had to basically scrap to keep it going and hand it off to other lawyers to make sure that it could get to the end zone. They couldn't possibly do it with one guy, Jimmy Scott, but he tried, and that's amazing. So let me ask you this, and we're going to wrap it up here pretty soon. I know you're not a geologist or a geoengineer,
Sure.
but your opinion watching these resource companies is valuable to me. RFK Jr., he's the new HHS secretary,
Sure.
and his claim to fame was in the 1990s. He was hailed as an environmental champion for his work with the River Keeper Association on the Hudson River cleanup.
Sure.
So after that dumping into the rivers for decades by GE, which is not good, we sent over Tennessee rivers. And we talked about this and how polluted they are and how they ship ash to Alabama and poor states probably follow up by now all over the country.
Mm.
I've reported on soil samples with the same toxins, camdium, aluminum, barium, all of it as this story. Tennessee passed a law against spraying from above last year, but they won't fine them for doing it now. They had a chance to do that this year. Do you think maybe, just maybe, instead of getting busted for dumping it in the rivers, they might now be eliminating it by disbursement in the sky?
Coal ash?
Yep.
There was a conspiracy theorist who reached out to me about this. My response to that is, like, they don't even need to do that. Like, that's such a, why would you spend the time and the resources to dump coal ash from the sky when you can just almost dump it anywhere? Like, you can put it, like, it just doesn't make it, like, if you're from a business perspective, if you're like, let me think where I can get rid of this coal ash. It is not hard. Like, now if you have a new coal ash pond, you have to have a liner on it, but that is not wildly expensive. There are landfills all over this country that are lined. That's kind of standard now. But if you have an old coal ash pond, which a lot of them are old, you don't have to go back and line them. You can, or excuse me, I want to misspeak. Until very recently, you could dump coal ash in unlined landfills. Yeah, I just don't see why you go through the trouble of dumping it from airplanes. The airplane fuel is expensive. Man hours are expensive to run an airplane. Yeah, let me say this. I'm not everywhere. I'm only one reporter, but I'll just say from my experience, I have seen no evidence of that with TVA's coal ash. And I'd be until there's really solid evidence to show that was happening, I'd be pretty dubious of that claim. Again, I've been surprised in the past, right? I've been surprised, and I could be surprised.
All I can remember is my biology teacher in high school said nothing ever goes away. And so my conspiracy mind started thinking, if they wanted to get rid of it and not say we did it in the river, how else then dump it in the sky and it goes wherever it wants, and then they're not responsible for it after that fact. And I hope you're right, and it's not true. So, but we did talk about the value of coal ash in the billions.
Yeah, this is actually my problem with conspiracy theorists. A lot of times, like, there are legitimate government conspiracies that are so boring, but should be so scandalous. But they're not as cool. They're not as, like, what do you call it, novel or as interesting as, say, like, jumping, I don't know, whatever.
They're not all made from movies like JFK or Killing Puppies and
yeah, whatever. Or what's the thing? What's the airplane fume thing? What is it?
That's chemtrails.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not as like that's like a really novel conspiracy theory. But there are real, I feel like, conspiracies, and they're so boring though. But yes, the government does not consider, one of them is the government does not consider coal ash or fly ash a hazardous waste. So there's very, very little regulations over it now. And so for decades, this stuff was used and still used for concrete. It's a concrete substitute. It's used in makeup. It's used in bowling ball fill.
Yeah.
And it boggles my mind when there's been decades of independent research that has shown that this stuff is full of arsenic and beryllium and cadmium and radium, that it's recycled and ends up in building materials.
Or a bowling ball
Again,
that you stick your fingers into and get a little sweaty or whatnot. So that's
yeah, I don't know. I don't know how it exactly works. Maybe you have to break open the bowling ball, but that happens, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, I mean, there's a whole town in North Carolina. The name escapes me. That they used coal ash to like level lots for homes. There's a whole town in North Carolina built on coal ash.
oh dear.
The Wall Street Journal did a story about it, maybe this time, maybe in the fall. To me, that's like, I mean, it's much more boring than like, these fanciful conspiracy theories. But to me, that's like a real thing our government has really screwed up on, and
Well, so here's a real one. Here's a scientific
okay.
one. So the latest numbers indicate that Bayer Monsanto alone has had to settle $11 billion for glyphosate use and exposure. Same chemical companies tried to get a liability waiver like pharma has for harm. Didn't work in Tennessee. It did in North Dakota and Florida. I see a lot of videos out both places with checkerboard skywriting all day. You called them chemtrails, or I told you that's what they call them. Could be pesticides, I guess. Groups like Beyond Pesticides oppose it. This glyphosate. Guess we, have to keep an eye on the Florida cancer rates and the North Dakota like that. Maybe your next book. You know anything about that?
No, I don't. No, I don't. This is all. I can't speak to really any of that. I'm hesitant to opine or discuss things that's not my expertise, and that is not. I wrote a piece about forever chemicals, PFAS, what they call them. I know 3M has faced billions upon billions of dollars of lawsuits over its PFAS contamination, forever chemicals, and yeah, I know these companies try to they try to wiggle out of these lawsuits however they can because they are can be rather expensive, but
it could bankrupt them, really. So it's a defense mechanism. Okay, last question. So the workers won. Spoiler alert. First,
kind of debatably won. They got a settlement. You can debate whether it was an equitable settlement, but yes,
right. But it was the first of its kind against coal. And the TVA, if a federal agency and is under House Transportation Committee, at the time it was Tennessee's Chuck Fleischman was on that committee. Tim Burchett is on it now. Didn't see any contributions from Jacobs to him. Steve Cohen, the only Tennessee Democrat, is on that committee. Nothing on the Senate side, Committee on Environment and Public Works. So we got the EPA, White House, State of Tennessee, nothing. TBI said they'd investigate, but nothing. You said about 50 have died. Do you think anything will be done?
At this point, I'm like pretty doubtful that the state will not do anything. I mean, right as these cases were settling, Jamie Satterfield, the reporter you mentioned, she went up to Bill Lee and said, mentioned the Kingston workers case to them. And his response was, I support TVA, because at the time he was trying to get Blue Oval here to build their big facility outside of Memphis. And a big part of that was securing low cost TVA power. So it wasn't in the governor's interest to play hardball with TVA. And he didn't say he did not say that, but like that's how. But that he did tell Jamie Satterfield, I support TVA, while all this was happening kind of in the background with the Kingston case and also Blue Oval. So, and yeah, the TBI, they investigated. They said they investigated I've talked to no worker who actually spoke to a member of the TBI. I know of no worker who spoke even through word of mouth to the TBI, but the TBI alleged that they investigated this case and they took it to a grand jury in Roane County, and the grand jury they're trying to get murder charges for some of these Jacobs staff, and the grand jury decided not to move forward with that. The workers were upset. They felt like the TBI had not truly listened to them. They felt like the TBI just did a really half-assed kind of investigation. But that's but the TBI would not speak with me. They didn't return comments.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they disown this as much. They don't even want to draw attention to it, I'm sure. So tell us what's next for you that we can look forward to. And do you have social media? How can people follow you and find out more about you? And how can they buy this book?
Yeah, thank you
this book right here, everybody. I want you all to see that.
Thank you for Yeah, it's called Valley So Low. It's available at every major book retailer. It should. I mean, here in Middle Tennessee, it's at Parnassus and Nashville, and also at Landmark Booksellers in Franklin, but also Amazon, Amazon, the big places like that. What's next? I'm kind of casting about for my next story. I'm not totally sure what I want to do. I care a lot about Tennessee, and so I wouldn't be surprised if my next story is set in Tennessee or just in the South, because I feel like we've come a long way, but I also feel like we have a long way to go. And I'm choosing to raise my family here, and I want Tennessee to flourish and be a place that people can live like healthy, productive lives and earn good wages. And I'm not sure what my story is though. I don't know. I got to find a story. There's a difference between a story and a topic.
I'll tell you this Elon Musk XAI Spartan Aquifer outside of Memphis, that's
That's a
going to be
big
a story
deal.
one day. That'd be
Yeah,
good for you.
that's a big deal. I mean, I spoke with Justin Pearson about that. They're all fired up about it, and it seems like for good reason. I'd be pretty upset too if they're running generators. There's the fuel to AI, and it seems like all this just pumping smog into their.
They expanded to 5 million gallons a day. It's going to get to a point where it's going to be like the surface of the moon, and they run out of water.
I hope not for the city of Memphis. I hope that Memphis leadership, Tennessee leadership, does something for those people, because I feel like in the state, our thinking has always been, well, we got to cater to do whatever we want to businesses to make them happy. But then why is our GDP per capita lower than other states? Like then why isn't the plan working? I mean, Tennessee's economy has grown recently, but we still lag the rest of the nation by a lot of economic metrics. So I think we should be trying to attract like the best companies here, the best workers. We don't want our college graduates, most of them, to leave for work elsewhere. We want to keep them here. We want to attract the best and the brightest. And to me, that's not by bending over backwards for Elon Musk to make him happy. It's saying, no, we're going to create a community where we're going to have good public schools. We're going to have a clean environment. You're going to want to raise your family here. And you can. There'll be good wages. Tennessee, we're good at building houses. Like housing prices have increased a lot, but we're better than other parts of the country. That's a strength of ours. We should lean into that, and we should be getting people excited, really, really excited to move to Tennessee, and companies too. And I think TVA could be part of that. Anyways, I'm kind of rambling, but I appreciate.
Amen, brother. And books like yours that create awareness can exactly turn the tide on that.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. Also, like your podcast is more of a conservative bit, and I don't want, like, should be, in my view, like a bipartisan thing. Like, it benefits all of us to have clean, abundant power, right? That's not like a lefty or a righty position. That is like a Tennessean position. Yep. Like, we would all agree.
I've had Cash Daniels on, the conservation kid, telling me early on in this show about the pollution of the Tennessee River. So I'm not making it a partisan issue myself. I think,
and it shouldn't be.
It's a bipartisan human issue when we're talking about clean water. I'm the guy that's trying to get the state to take fluoride out of it, and Florida and Utah, listen to me, Tennessee hasn't. So yeah, you and I are on the same page when it comes to, we just want clean air, clean water, and a healthy, happy pursuit of happiness.
Yeah. And we can do it, so that'd be my challenge. Like, it's easy to call for the burning down of TVA. Like, people have been doing that forever. It's much more productive and be much easier just to say, like, let's reform it and make it great again.
And you nailed it. His cousin, FDR's cousin, Teddy Roosevelt, was a John Bircher. He's the guy, he's Republican, yet loved the environment. And so should we all, because we can't be conservative if our land is on fire.
Well, there's a business case for all of this. That's why I keep on trying to say, it's not like, I think, Eisenhower got obsessed with TVA as like this socialist thing. Well, maybe, yeah, like it is more, it is owned by the government, sure, but also like brought a lot of factories here that really help people. And I feel like we should like keep that in mind. Like, we need, like, it would only help us if our power rates were lower. And our power rates, I mean, we live in the same town. Our power is not expensive. Our power is not expensive. Our power is not cheap now in Tennessee.
There's an entire sub industry of just cleaning it up. And these guys get the highest paychecks that they've ever had, who are in the disposal business, so to speak. So why not keep it clean on a regular basis while also creating that lower energy
Exactly.
costs. I mean, it's a win-win for everybody. Whether they vote Democrat or Republican shouldn't really make a difference. And whether Governor Lee's in the governor's mansion or Biden's in the White House, it should just be the land of the free and clean air. All right. All right. Well, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on here. Good luck with the book.
Yes,
Can't
thank you
wait
for
to see
having
you
me.
next one.
I
Love to have you
appreciate it.
back again when you got another one to announce. And hold on, everybody. I will be right back.
Sing a song about the heartland, the only place I feel at home. Sing about the way a good man works until the daylight's gone. Sing the rain on the
Oh boy, thanks for coming back. I hope you liked that. If you didn't, I don't know why I'm doing this. That was a good one. It is that time to remind everyone to please subscribe if you haven't by now. After 352 episodes, I don't know why you haven't, but if you haven't, please subscribe and pass it around. Get me some more subscribers so more people can hear this type of story. That is how we grow and keep this content free for you. What's wrong with free? Now, the Heartland Journal news. Last week, I went all over the judges so far that I could fit in, at least. There's more that were obstructing Trump's agenda, his popularly mandated landslide victory mandate, totally unconstitutional separation of powers. Lower courts were never meant to be that powerful to hamstring a president. So I'm not the only one that figured this out. Only SCOTUS can rein in the judicial coup. That is Supreme Court of the United States for you liberals listening, by Hans von Spakovsky, one of the great names in journalism, Hans von Spakovsky. Nationwide injunctions essentially undo the results of the last election by keeping in place Biden's policies that more than 77 million voters rejected in 2024. It's all about the nationwide injunction, folks. Here we go. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments on May 15th on what has become a debilitating critical crisis, the issuance of nationwide injunctions en masse by federal district court judges. Notably, the overwhelming majority of those judges are Democrat appointees who seek to prevent President Trump from doing what he was elected to do, govern. According to a lawsuit tracker by the Associated Press, more than 200 lawsuits have been filed against Trump executive orders. I only did 16 over 2 days. In 3 consolidated cases from Washington, my beloved ex-state, just kidding, Maryland, and Massachusetts, federal district court judges issued nationwide injunctions, sometimes called universal injunctions, or to quote Justice Neil Gorsuch, cosmic injunctions, against the implementation of a Trump executive order ending universal birthright citizenship. The plaintiffs in those cases claim the order violates the 14th Amendment. Those injunctions reflect a broader pattern. In less than 4 months, roughly 40 nationwide injunctions have been entered against the Trump administration, almost double the number entered during all 4 years of the Biden administration. As Solicitor General John Sauer pointed out, 35 have come from the same 5 judicial districts. One could reasonably argue that the judges entering these orders are essentially attempting to undo the results of the last election by keeping in place Biden administration's policies that more than 77 million voters roundly rejected last November. These judges apparently believe they have more authority than the president to make decisions on everything from domestic and foreign policy to matters affecting national security and the military. The Supreme Court should vigorously enforce its prior precedents, including its 1984 decision in U.S. v. Mendoza, which strictly limit the ability of a single unelected district court judge, of whom there are nearly 700, to keep the administration from achieving its policy objectives by ruling not just for those who filed a lawsuit, but also for everyone who didn't. The court must also end a blatant judge shopping and what amounts to a collective wholesale interference in the president's constitutional authority as head of the executive branch. The May 15th session was itself unusual, hopefully a sign that Chief Justice John Roberts finally recognizes the judicial crisis these lower court judges are causing. Typically, oral arguments end in April, and emergency requests for stays are usually decided on the pleadings without oral arguments. We have to wonder whether the Chief Justice was prompted to act in part by Justice Samuel Alito's rather stinging March 5 dissent in Department of State versus AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition, a dissent joined by Justice Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh. Can always rely on Chief Justice John Roberts to be on the right side of history. There, the majority refused to step in and stay a lower court injunction, and the dissent remonstrated. Does a single district court judge who likely lacks jurisdiction have the unchecked power to compel the government of the United States to pay out and probably lose forever $2 billion taxpayer dollars? The answer to that question should be an emphatic no, but a majority of this court apparently thinks otherwise. I am stunned. That was Neil Gorsuch saying that, or Samuel Alito saying that. In the May 15 case, the arguments before the court weren't about the substantive merits of the birthright citizenship dispute, although that came up peripherally. Rather, the arguments focused on the appropriateness of the nationwide injunctions issued by 3 different judges. The government didn't even ask for a complete stay of the injunctions. Rather, it simply asked that the Supreme Court limit the injunctions to the individuals who brought the lawsuit, the members of the challenging association and the residents of the state that sued, if those states have standing. In his opening statement, Sauer summarized all the arguments made against universal injunctions. Not only do they exceed the judicial power granted to our courts in Article 3 of the Constitution, but they create a host of practical problems. They encourage rampant forum shopping. They require judges to make rushed, high-stakes, low-information decisions. They circumvent Rule 23 by offering all the benefits but none of the burdens of class action certification. They operate asymmetrically, forcing the government to win everywhere while the plaintiffs can win anywhere. They invert the ordinary hierarchy of appellate review. They create the ongoing risk of conflicting judgments. They create what Justice Lewis Powell described as repeated and essentially head-on confrontations between the life tenure and representative branches of government, and they disrupt the Constitution's careful balancing of the separation of powers. Yes. As expected, the most liberal members of the court, Justice Sonia Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson, were extremely hostile in their questioning, to the point that the Chief Justice chided Sotomayor for repeatedly questioning Sauer, but then interrupting before he could answer. Justice Elena Kagan was less overtly hostile, but she seemed to be groping for a way to argue that the nationwide injunctions entered against the Biden administration were wrong, but that those against Trump are somehow legally justified. Justice Alito pointed out a universal truth about judges, saying that they are vulnerable to an occupational disease, which is the disease of thinking that, quote, I am right and I can do whatever I want. That occupational disease has infected dozens of federal judges who are acting as if they are super legislatures with the power both to veto anything President Trump does and to promulgate broad perspective rules that apply to the entire nation, which most people call laws. Rather than rendering a judgment in favor of the party that filed the lawsuit and only the party that filed that lawsuit. In a speech at Georgetown Law, recently, the Chief Justice claimed that the rule of law is endangered because of the trashing of these activist judges. If Roberts wants to remedy that, then the justices need to step up to the plate and act decisively to bring the judiciary back within the limits of its constitutional authority. Hans von Spakovsky is a senior legal fellow in Heritage's Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. Ed Meese was Ronald Reagan's Attorney General. That's it for this episode. Thank you, Jared Sullivan, for writing an excellent book that really needs to be a movie, not just because most don't read anymore, but because the more people that hear about this, the better, and for immortalizing the lives of those Kingston workers who died. May they rest in peace. So spread the show around for us, folks. That is how we honor them, and we also grow. That is goodbye for now. I'm your host, Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of HeartlandJournal.com. See y'all next time. Peace in our time, and definitely glory to God. Amen.
Yeah, I've been dreaming of the wild, wild plains, walking where the pine trees dance, where the river runs deep and the birds all sing.
Any views or opinions represented on the podcast are personal and belong solely to the creator and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the creator may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity unless explicitly stated.